I would hope that by now everyone knows what a car DVR is, but for those people that have been in a coma in the last few years, I'll just reiterate once more. It's a camera that goes in the front windscreen of your car. You plug it into the lighter socket. When the engine starts and the socket receives power, that starts the camera recording, and therefore it records all your journeys a little bit like a black box would in an aircraft. Now, over the last few years, I've reviewed quite a few of these car cameras. In fact, I think I've reviewed 10 so far. And as a result of that, I get a lot of questions in my inbox every day asking me to tell people which the best model is. And my answer to that is, I don't know. Now, that's not just me being awkward, although that is something that does happen. No, on this occasion, just look at the problem. Put car DVR into eBay, which is where I get most of these from, and you get thousands of different models. Well, probably more like hundreds of different models sold by lots of different people. But you get the idea. There's an awful lot of different ones here, and I've only reviewed maybe 10, and that's over the last few years, and some of those aren't even available anymore. So when you look at what's on the market today, I probably haven't looked at the best one. Now, to be classed as car cameras, all those cameras should share some common features. They loop the video round, they're powered by the 12-volt socket in the car, and they auto start and stop when they receive power through that socket. If your car is one of those ones that doesn't disconnect the power when you turn off the ignition, you're pretty much stuffed. Now, as far as things to look out for, I'd always recommend that you get ones that record in H.264 and you avoid 1280 by 960 resolution because it's always upscaled. Look for 720p or 1080p. And then at this point you're down to personal preference. What I'd like on a camera would be for it to be as small as possible. It doesn't even need to have a screen on it. I just want to be able to fit it and forget it. Your requirements might be completely different. The first thing is to decide how much you're prepared to pay for one. And then there's a few other things to think about, including what features you'd like on it, things like GPS, for example. But for me to review a camera, there's only one thing that I'm looking for, and that's that it's got to be different. And that's because it's quite difficult for me to find new things to say about car cameras when they all pretty much do the same job. So that's why I got this one into review. Now, the difference about this one, well, it's quite small for a start off and it's gold, but that's not the big difference. It's this thing here. It's got a separate camera that you attach to the back of your car to record what's going on behind you as well as what's going on in front of you. But before I go any further, I just wanted to show you the box because it doesn't inspire an awful lot of confidence because it's littered with spelling mistakes. For example, it's a Vehil DVR, it's got a camera pixel, it's got night vision, and it's got spirating temperature and operating humidity with a media player. But those aren't the important specs. The important ones are that it's a 120-degree wide-angle lens camera that records in 720p in H.264 MOV file format. Now, this camera cost me approximately £50, as usual, from eBay. And for those people that like these things converting into dollars, well, in my head I reckon it's about 81.0775, but we best just check to be sure. Oh yeah, there we go. I'll just quickly go through the things that you get inside the box. Well, first off, obviously that's a remote control, infrared remote control. That's the power supply, which is a 12-volt power supply to a mini USB. You've got a mini USB to full-size USB for data transfer. This thing on the left is the bracket that goes in the back of the camera here to mount it to your car. It slides in one direction only, into that little hole there. Slide it on, it's got a bit of 3M sticky stuff on the other side, which obviously means that that can only be used once. There's a little bag with some string in it here. Don't know what that's for, we'll figure that out later. And then this is the wire for AV out. It's a 3.5mm to 2.5mm mini jack. There's two screws here, and those are for this thing if you mount it to your car, and that is the rear camera. You can see the two holes in the bracket there. It's also got some double-sided sticky stuff on it, and it appears to come with plenty of wire. The other thing inside the camera was this 4GB class 4 micro SD card, on which were the instructions as a Word document for the camera, which didn't make much sense at all, to be honest, as well as some software to use the camera as a webcam. Now we'll just switch the camera on and have a quick look at it. There's the blue light coming on now to show it's on, and then the screen comes on. We'll just see how these two cameras work. Well, as you can see from the screen here, it's a picture-in-picture job. There's the camera at the top right, which is the rear one, in that little square there, and then the main camera takes up the rest of the screen, as you can see from my thumb here, but it's upside down at the moment. That's because it's supposed to point that way out. Now, you don't have to use both the cameras. If you want, you can unplug the rear camera, which I'm going to do now, and you'll see the screen reverts to just showing the one camera image. We'll just have a quick tour around the camera. On the left here, you've got a power button followed by reset, an AV out socket, and then a socket for the rear camera. On the opposite side, you've got the USB socket, and the hole on the right there on the circular bit, that's the microphone hole. On the top of the camera, starting at the left, you've got the window for the infrared receiver. Then you've got two buttons that are sort of multifunctional. The button with the triangle on the right is for emergency use, and then to the right of that is the slot to put the micro SD cards into. And then finally on this side of the camera, of course on the left there, you've got the screen. To the right of that, you've got 3 LEDs across the top, 2 blue and 1 red one. Below that, you've got a record button to manually start and stop the recording, as well as a mic button to turn the mic off if you want to. And then below that, you've got the lens that's surrounded by these 4 LEDs that are supposed to be for night vision. Now let's temporarily install the camera in the car so I can take some test footage. I'm going to put it right at the top of the windscreen here so it's out of my line of sight. Now the USB lead I'm plugging into the right here, that would have to feed all the way around to the 12 volt lighter socket, and similarly the rear camera lead that I'm plugging in now would have to feed all the way around to the rear camera at the back of the car, and you'd have to tidy those away somehow. This is the rear camera again. I'm going to stick that to the middle inside of the rear window. I don't know if that's waterproof, by the way, maybe it is, but anyway, I'm sticking it to the inside like that, and that means there's a big wire hanging down the middle of the back window, which of course I would tidy it away if I was doing it properly. Now here's what the camera looks like when it's working. The LEDs at the top, left one shows it's on, middle one shows it's got power, right one shows it's recording. And then there's quite a few things on the screen. At the bottom left here, it shows the night vision's off, the microphone's on, and the rear camera's connected. The red thing counting up in the middle shows it's recording, and the right thing's the time and the date. At the top left there, you've got a flashing camera to show it's recording as well, and 720p. There's a micro SD card in it, and the battery's charging. Now if you want to remove the camera from your car, it's just a matter of sliding it to the right and it just leaves that plastic bracket behind on the inside of your windscreen. Or it would just be the bracket if it wasn't for the wires that you've now carefully mounted around your car. So those are going to be left behind as well, of course. But it's still a lot neater than the traditional style of car camera, these big black things with a massive bracket on it, and they get especially large when you fold down the screen on them, much too large for my car. Right, I think that's enough build up, so let's get that lens adjusted again and get out on the road and take some test footage. So here we are. This is of course from the front camera. It's in 1280 by 720 resolution at 30 frames a second, and it looks nice and clear and smooth and sharp. Now let's have a look what that section of road looked like from the rear camera, the exact same section. Now the rear camera records in 740 by 480 resolution, so it's not HD, it's still H.264, but it's SD resolution. But it's still perfectly usable. Now I'm going to show you both cameras side by side here. This isn't something that's come straight out of the camera, this is me in the editing package. In the camera you can swap between the front and the rear cameras and have them both on screen at once, which is what I do around about now, and you'll see it jumps a little bit there, and that's because I was messing with the settings while I was going around that corner just to see what happened. Now what you do on the screen on the camera isn't reflected on the recordings. It will record both things on the memory card regardless of what you're looking at on the screen. Now the quality of the video that's coming from this camera is very good for the price. One thing I will mention, look at the timestamp at the top left there. I say look at it, you probably can't see it because it's very difficult to read on a white background. Now at night time the camera also performs very well indeed. It's completely dark at the moment, it's quite late at night. I don't know what time that says at the top left there, but I think it's 9 o'clock getting on for. Both cameras perform reasonably well in the dark. The back one perhaps not as good, but still perfectly fine. Of course it's got lights shining right into it, which might cause it a bit of problem. The back one has more sort of gain on it than the front one. The front one's more accurate, but both are very good to use as evidence in the event of an accident. This is a rear camera zoomed up on the screen there, so you can see what it looks like in full screen mode, which isn't really very pretty. The front one in lower light conditions like we're in now, again, still totally usable as evidence in the event of an unfortunate crash. Now, I did mention in the video there that you can choose between picture-in-picture like this on the camera screen, or you can have either camera filling the full screen up. So that will make some people think they can use the rear camera as a reversing camera, and you can, but you'll have to keep that remote control in your car as well, because it's the only way that you can switch between the different sources. There's no button on the camera itself. I just want to quickly talk about some of the setup options. It's all controlled with these buttons across the top here in a rather strange way. In the menus you can change between VGA and 720p mode. Of course I left it in 720p for my videos. You can change how long you want the individual segments of video to be, 1, 2 or 5 minutes, or just continuous recording. There's no gap between the segments, and of course it will loop over the oldest one when the card is full. You can change between 30 frames a second and 60. 60 just shows every frame twice. It's not true 60 frames per second. And then there are some more settings that you don't really need to mess with, at least I didn't. Things in here that you might want to change, perhaps make the time and date not appear on your recordings. You can also change the language, of course. And it's got things like a G sensor thing there, which I'll explain in a minute. And of course you can format the card if you want and change the time and date. Now the G sensor is a little bit like this triangle button here. I'll show you what I mean. If we were driving along, let's start it recording. It's recording now. We're driving down the road as normal. Everything's fine. Then suddenly something happens. We want to save. You press the triangle button. That makes this little padlock appear at the bottom of the screen, and that moves that file that's recording at that moment into a safe place on the card. And the G sensor does a similar thing. Any bump or shock above a predetermined amount will get the file moved to that special place on the card. Now we'll just have a look at the card. We'll attach the camera to the PC. This menu pops up. You get 3 options to use it as a USB disk, a PC camera, which is a webcam of course, and then the bottom one, which if you want to record and charge at the same time using a USB port. But we'll just look at the contents of the SD card. You'll see we've got DCIMA and DCIMB. A relates to the front camera and B to the rear one. And then in both of those folders you've got event, motion and video. Now most video files end up in the video one, and those are the ones that get overridden when the card's full. The event folder is where stuff goes if you press that triangle button or it gets a G-force sensor shock. Motion, I think, is where the stuff goes if you start motion activated recording. Now in those folders the file names are very sensibly laid out. They've got the time and the date in each file name, and it's very easy to find the file that you need. And back to the camera, one thing I didn't use were these 2 screws because I didn't want to attach the camera permanently to my car. I don't think I'd want to screw anything to it anyway. I used a sticky back pad on it and it goes this way up. The wires that come with this are quite considerable. I mean, you're going to really have to work at hiding these inside your car if you want to put this in permanently. Let's look at the length of them to start with. This is the USB lead and it's quite a long one. As you can see from this, it's about 13 feet long or 4 meters. Now we'll just have a look at the other lead, which is the one that's for the rear view camera, which of course has to go further in the car, right to the back of the car from the front, and that one is 6 meters, or just getting on for almost 20 feet long. So that's quite a lot of wire to hide around inside your car. There are another couple of things I'd like to point out. The LEDs on the back of this camera are ridiculously bright. To say that they're inside your car facing towards you as you're driving along, they're much too bright for the job. Here they are inside my house pointing at a wall, and they're actually lighting the wall up. Now of course you could cover those up with some kind of tape, but you shouldn't really have to. But one thing you can turn off is that LCD screen, which will help if you are going to run the camera just on the battery power alone, because it will increase the recording time from 1.5 hours up to 2.5 hours if you've got the screen off. By the way, the file sizes expect to use about 150 megabytes for 5 minutes, but that will vary because it uses a variable bit rate. Now I couldn't get that AV out socket to work. I didn't have anything that took a 2.5mm AV in, but I did find a lead that I could convert a 3.5mm AV out to 3 phonos, but it just wouldn't work with my TV. But it's not such a major loss because it would only be SD quality anyway, but it would give that remote control something to do. The sound recording capabilities of this camera are pretty decent. There is a bit of electronic interference that you can hear when things go quiet, but overall it's not bad at all. One thing that doesn't seem to work at all are the night vision LEDs. Whether they're on or off, the video looks identical, but it's not such a big deal because night vision LEDs are always a complete waste of time anyway, and as we mentioned earlier on, the night vision recording capabilities of this camera are pretty good. So there you have it, that's my review of this car camera. Now again, I'm not saying that it's the best camera that's around or the worst camera that's around, I'm just confirming that it's a camera that's around, and overall I think that it's pretty decent value for money. But I can't comment on its long-term reliability because I've only had it a few weeks. And I never did find out what that 80cm piece of string was for. Perhaps it had fallen into the wrong box. But for the moment, thanks for watching.